Maybe you haven't noticed the building safety crisis.
I'm terrified, to be honest. Our bills are liquidated during development of the block. If I can't pay these bills, I will lose my home, I will lose my career.
Maybe you think it's just about Grenfell or cladding or high-rises, but you'd be wrong.
The problems identified with my building include combustible cladding, flammable insulation, missing cavity barriers and timber balconies. My expected bill is likely to be upwards of £70,000.
If you live in one of Britain's cities, you probably know someone, are working with someone, are someone who is affected. It is a public policy failure of extraordinary scope, reach and depth. But where did it come from? Why is it happening? And why is so little being done to make it disappear?
So looking at a minimum of £120,000 for a building that my part was only built in 2018 and I only bought it in 2019. So, yep, bankruptcy any moment now.
In Bow, in East London, there's Mojo Development. It's a decade old, full of starter homes sold on the promise of the freedoms of home ownership. But for Charlotte and all of the other leaseholders, that freedom has become a trap.
We've got flammable cladding on parts of the building. We've also got combustible insulation, and we do have, in all of the areas surveyed on our part of the development, we have missing cavity barriers as well.
I mean, how is this affecting you and the other leaseholders here?
It's really hard to put into words quite how stressful it is. For me, mentally, it's been a challenge, especially the last, the last 6 to 8 months, when everything is really ramped up and the issues have really come to light. But the constant fear that your entire life savings, your home, is going to be ripped from you is a really terrifying prospect when it's not something that you've personally done.
The residents say that the freeholder, the developer, are barely engaging with them. This isn't uncommon. Their properties are now unmortgageable. Like so many, their lives are in aspic. The futures they thought they'd have, lost.
I don't know what I want to do. I'm facing a bill of £120,000 if it's not covered by the Building Safety Fund. I just can't afford it. My mental health is deteriorating massively. I've had to take time off work just because the uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen. What do I do?
You need to understand that this isn't about cladding. It started with cladding after Grenfell, but as a result of the checks which buildings have needed to make after Grenfell, including having to have an EWS1 form signed off to prove that the building is safe, all sorts of other problems in building after building have been identified. Flammable insulation, flammable balconies, missing fire cavity barriers. The list has seemed endless.
In the analysis that we've done, about 90% of them, the modern buildings, contain combustible elements in the facade, and of that, about 60% of those fail EWS1, so they get a B2 grade. So that's thousands of buildings across the UK. We haven't got a full number for it, but in multiple thousands of buildings.
There's around 88,000 medium-rise blocks in the UK. If you think that 1 in 5 high-rises were affected, if you just take that number across, you might have 20,000 buildings in that medium-rise category. And then you would be talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people.
I'm extremely worried that I'm going to end up bankrupt and how that's going to impact on my future. It's an appalling situation that we find ourselves in.
The people we're showing you speak for hundreds of thousands of others. Indeed, they speak for hundreds of thousands of others still, people who don't yet know they have a problem where they live, but they will when their buildings are checked, legally responsible as leaseholders, even though technically they don't own a brick. The question you must be asking yourself is how? How could it be that so many modern buildings could have been constructed so poorly? And the answer lies both in systemic failure in the construction industry, but also on behalf of successive governments who have pursued a policy of deregulation both of the construction industry itself, but also of the building inspection regime since the 1980s.
I think they say around 300 pages of regulations were sort of scrapped overnight and replaced with just 24 headline standards. And they gave the industry much more power to figure out for themselves what complied and what didn't. The problem is that when that's combined with an industry that seeks to save money where it can, you end up with a race to the bottom in terms of quality.
There's an attitude that just permeates throughout the whole of the industry, which is to do the minimum that we need in each case. Everybody values the cost of the project or what's delivered at the end of the project, but they've not considered the safety measures as they've gone through. So they have deliberately gone about finding the cheapest possible solutions to any of the safety issues as they've gone through the whole of the process.
It's very easy for a building to be built in a way that wasn't specified. So there could be a significant divergence between what was designed and what was actually built.
The government has offered a £5 billion fund to help with costs, but this is confined only to buildings of 18 metres and above, and then only assists with cladding. It is pledging to replace a system of building regulation. Reforms, they say, will make it harder to pass on costs and easier for leaseholders to sue. Only helpful, of course, if they can afford it. In some ways, the problem is almost too vast.
They're reluctant for this, the Treasury in particular, is reluctant for what could be a huge blank cheque to sit on the public balance sheet. And so they want this to be paid for privately.
And do you think that the much talked about relationship between developers and the government and the Conservative Party, is that part of the picture, do you think?
I think what is certainly true is that the government haven't done anything that's upset the developer share prices or anything which the developers have been particularly angry about at any point.
Repeatedly, the government has said that developers should pay, but hasn't forced them to do so. These people did nothing more than do what society told them they should: save, buy, invest in their future. The cruelty is that that very act has bound them, that as things stand, they don't have much of a future at all.
This scandal, this crisis is the first thing I think of when I wake up and the last thing I think of before I go to sleep. It's completely taken over my life.
That's ending that film by Lewis Goodall. Well, we asked Bellway, the developer for Charlotte's building, for a response, and they said they've committed £131.6 million to make fire safety improvements or put in place interim measures at no cost to leaseholders. They said in this case they're reviewing the information and will be in contact with the managing agents. We also went to the freeholder. They said that they had replaced the managing agent, who's since been communicating regularly with leaseholders. They said they'd written to Bellway to request they contribute to remediation costs and have made an insurance claim, as well as the insurers of the building. Well, we're going to hear now from two leaseholders who've been caught up in this endlessly frustrating crisis. Val Peets is from Manchester and Liam Spender's a litigation lawyer speaking on behalf of an action group of residents who are in London. A warm welcome to you both, Val. And I think some of those stories from the film will be very familiar to you. Lewis used that phrase, a life in aspect, and I think you had tried to retire. You had retired, and then you'd had to go back to work because of this.
Yes. I had quite a simple retirement plan, quite a modest one, that I would sell my apartment, I would get rid of a small mortgage, get rid of the service charges, so cut down my overheads, buy something for cash and settle. Minimum overheads, stress-free life. Unfortunately, that's not happened. My apartment now is zero value, so I can't sell it. And then because of the extortionate hike in insurance costs, which went from about £20,000 a year to £205,000, absolutely exorbitant, it meant that my service charges doubled to pay for that. So I then realised that I couldn't afford to stay in retirement, so I've had to go back to work to be able to pay my monthly bills.
So where does that leave you? How long are you going to keep working for?
I don't know. I can't see an end to it at the moment because it's been going on for 4 years. And obviously I'm not 20 years old. I don't have endless years to sit and wait for this to resolve itself. So my life is just on hold. What can I do? I'm working. I've gone back to the NHS. I'm very fortunate. I can work, but I'm only an agency worker now. I don't have a substantive post. So I'm hoping that the work will carry on a little bit longer. You hope for a resolution, but I can't see an end to it at the moment, not with the way things are.
When you retired, you didn't know any of this.
No.
You didn't know this was round the corner.
No.
And this is probably what a lot of people are going to encounter when
exactly.
the scale of this becomes clearer. I mean, do you sometimes think about you wish they'd never told you, or do you think I was living in something that was that unsafe for all those years?
That's a bit of a twofold thing, really. I think that, how can I put this? We can't legislate against every risk. And I think we now have to take a common sense approach. I don't feel the building that I live in is actually that unsafe. Grenfell was absolutely horrendous. And, you know, we do not want to see that again. And it's right that we've looked at this and we have, you know, tried to sort of remedy the problems that there are. But if you have a reasonably safe, well-managed building that's well alarmed, then I think at some point you have to take a view that how far can we go with all of this? And I know that's a wee bit controversial, but in life we can't legislate against every single risk. And whereas we don't want another Grenfell, and we don't want things that are at that end of the scale, I think the way the government has now approached this domino effect, we've gone completely the other way.
Let me bring in Liam. What advice would you be giving? Because you're basically trying to help other residents in this position with your action group. What are you telling them, Liam?
We need urgent action from the government. What sort of government do we have leaving a pensioner like Val to go back to work to fix the mistakes of others being civil servants, developers, planners, architects, the people who've actually put these buildings up? And you can't expect leaseholders to pay to put the toothpaste back in the tube, but that's what we're being asked to do. This is a problem made in Whitehall. It needs to be fixed in Whitehall. As Val says, we need to take it by the scruff of the neck, and we need to get a solution that works for everybody.
And what do you think that is? I mean, do you think it should be taxpayers? Do you think it should be the industry? Would you just like to see one big lump sum from the government pay out what could be, you know, as we now know, a million leaseholders? What do you think that is?
This is the failure of the state, so whichever way you cut it, there has to be some taxpayer contribution. And we've paid our taxes in the same way as everyone else, but the lion's share has to come from the industry, as you showed in your package. It's the industry that's cut every conceivable corner to put these buildings up and walked away, and the government has compounded the problem by changing the rules midstream and by massively overreacting. And the bill.
So you think that's an overreaction too, do you?
Well, it's those aren't my words. That's a précis of what Robert Jenrick told the Commons in July when he introduced the Building Safety Bill. The difference between what I'm saying and what Mr. Jenrick is saying is Mr. Jenrick isn't putting a solution behind his rhetoric. He's just saying everyone should do the right thing.
To be fair, he is. The government's saying we've put £5 billion towards this. We're pushing the construction industry and builders as far as we can to actually improve. We've introduced the new Building Safety Regulation Bill. I mean, they will say they're on this. You would say what?
They're not on this at all. All they're giving us is warm words of the kind you've just repeated, and I appreciate that's your job, but we deserve better from the government. The government knows that the problem is worth far more than £5 billion, and it knows that it's trying to pass the buck onto the people who are in no way responsible for it. Is it doing that to protect the people who donate money to the Conservative Party? Is it doing it because it's incompetent? Is it doing it because it doesn't care? We don't know. We need to find out. We need to come up with a solution.
I mean, we don't know, to be fair, and the government aren't here tonight. You're suggesting that this is because of donations from the construction industry or from developers to the Conservatives. We've got no proof of that.
Well, they pay. We know that they pay £1 in every 5 of donations that goes to the Conservative Party. If the government's so confident in its case, why is it not here to defend it?
OK, well, we don't know that, but we very much appreciate your thoughts and bringing those to us here tonight. Thank you so much for coming.